So hello guys, welcome to my YouTube channel Med School with Shubham. I am Shubham Mane, a third professional MBBS student and I shall be teaching you anatomy. I have started a series on embryology on my YouTube channel in which I have completed the entire general embryology and I have started the systemic embryology. I have completed the entire general embryology and the pharyngeal arches also, and today we will be learning about the development of the face. So let's get started in today's lecture. Guys, there is a small request. If you have not watched my previous lectures, I request you please go on my YouTube channel and watch all the lectures of general embryology, because the understanding of general embryology is very important for learning the systemic embryology. So let's get started with today's lecture about the development of the face. So for the development of the face, we require 5 components. That are 5 components are required for the development of the face. So the first one which is required is the frontonasal process. Frontonasal process. The first component that we require is the frontonasal process. The next one is the mandibular process. Mandibular process. And the third one is the maxillary process. Maxillary process. Okay, so there are I said there are 5 components which are needed for the development of the face, but I have written only 3, that is frontonasal process, the mandibular process and the maxillary process. Now what happens that this frontonasal process is unpaired, and this mandibular and the maxillary process they are paired. Okay, they are paired. So the frontonasal process is 1, mandibular process are 2 in number, and maxillary process are also 2 in number. So overall there are 5 components which are needed for the development of the face. The frontonasal process is a mesenchymal thickening in the cranial region. Mesenchymal or mesodermal, you can also say both of them. Mesenchymal thickening in the cranial region. Okay. Now from where does mandibular process come? So mandibular process is derived from the first pharyngeal arch. First pharyngeal arch. So the first pharyngeal arch, it gives rise to mandibular process, and also the maxillary process. The maxillary process, it is derived itself from the mandibular process. So the mandibular process gives rise to a process which is called as the maxillary process. I'll be explaining that in the diagram, but I hope you have understood all these things. There are 5 components which are needed for the development of the face. The frontonasal process, which is unpaired, which is the mesenchymal thickening in the cranial region. The mandibular process, which is paired, and it is derived from the first pharyngeal arch. And third one is the maxillary process, which is also paired, and it is derived from the mandibular process. I hope this is very clear. Now let's see the proper development of the face in the diagrammatic form. Okay. Assume. So first I will draw this frontonasal process. So this is the frontonasal process, and these are 2 mandibular process. The frontonasal process and 2 mandibular process. Let me color it. Okay. So these are the 2 mandibular process, and this white color is the frontonasal process. Now what will happen? This mandibular processes, it will start growing towards each other and it will fuse together to form an entire mandibular process. So now we'll get a structure in this way. So this is the frontonasal process, and now here we got the entire mandibular process. Okay. Now what happens inside the frontonasal process, we have a thing which is called as, here we have Even here you can also appreciate it. The thing which I am making over here is called as nasal placodes. Nasal placodes. These are the nasal placodes that you can see over here. These two are nasal placodes, and inside the mandibular process you can see the formation of the maxillary process over here. I hope you can see this. This is the maxillary process. These are the two maxillary process. Okay, and let me name those things first. This is the frontonasal process. This is the nasal placodes. Then this one is the mandibular process. Mandibular process, and this thing that you can see over here is the maxillary process. Maxillary process. Okay, now what happens in the next step? This nasal placodes, it starts developing even more further, and then it will come a bit medial. It will start coming medially. Okay, and now we can get these nasal placodes over here, and now these nasal placodes even more further develops further, and now we will get something, a structure which is like this. This is the frontonasal process. This is the mandibular process. Okay, now over here we have the nasal placodes have migrated, and now it has even become more developed. So now we will call these things now nasal pits. Nasal pits. First we had the nasal placodes, now we have the nasal pits, and further this maxillary process will be growing even more deeper, even more further. Okay. Let's color these things. Okay, so this is the mandibular process, and this is the maxillary process. Mandibular process, maxillary process, nasal pits, and the frontonasal process. Now what happens in the further step? The region around the nasal pits, the borders or the region around the nasal pits, or the borders of the nasal pits, they become more prominent and thickened. And now they will form a structure which is called as, this is the frontonasal process. This is the frontonasal process, and the nasal pits, the borders of the nasal pits has now become even more developed in this way. Yes, these are the borders of the nasal pits, and now these borders have become more thickened, and now these structures are called as, the medial one is the medial nasal process. These two, the medial one is the medial nasal process, and the lateral one over here is the lateral nasal process. Okay, so we had nasal pits, now we have nasal processes. So this one is the lateral nasal process, and this one that you can see over here is the medial nasal process. Okay, so this was the development of the nasal process and the nasal placodes. Now let's come to the mandibular process. What happens to that? So here we had the development of the here we have the mandibular process that was growing, and we got the maxillary process. The maxillary process were also growing. So the maxillary process will now start growing even more further, and now it will join with the lateral nasal process. It will join with the lateral nasal process, or it will touch the lateral nasal process, but ultimately it will go and fuse with the medial nasal process. I hope this is clear. I will show on this side also. The maxillary process starts growing. It will touch the, or it will join with the lateral nasal process. This is the lateral nasal process, but ultimately it will go and fuse with the medial nasal process. This is the medial nasal process. Okay, so I can get a structure in this way. These are the maxillary process. This is the maxillary process. It is touching the lateral nasal process, but ultimately it is going and fusing with the medial nasal process. The lateral nasal process, maxillary process, it is joining or the touching the lateral nasal process, but ultimately it will go and fuse with the medial nasal process. Okay. So this was about the maxillary process. Now what will happen further? Let me color that. Guys, I am using this different color so that you can understand the development of the structures, how, from where does it is coming. Okay. Now what will happen further? See, these are rings. These, what do you say? These nasal processes are rings. So now what will happen? This medial nasal process and the lateral nasal process, they will start rotating medially. So this is the process, nasal process, assume. So they will start rotating medially, and even they will come closer to each other. So these processes, they will start rotating medially and they will start coming close to each other. And now there will be a time when this both this medial nasal process, they will fuse with each other, and it will and the lateral nasal process will be on the lateral side. Okay, and now these all structures will be start making different structures of the face. So let's make a face on which I will be showing you what structures are formed from which of these structures. Assume that this is a face. Also one more thing, here you will get the formation of the lens placodes. We saw the formation of nasal placodes. Now this is the formation of the lens placodes. So from the lens placodes we will get the eye. Eye formation will take place. This is the nose. This is the middle part of the nose, and this is the ala of the nose. This is the middle part of the nose. Okay, and these two things are the ala of the nose. These two things are the ala of the nose. Then you have this V thing, or the middle central side. It is called as the philtrum. Then you have philtrum over here, and then these are the two lips. Okay, now let's use the same colors to show what structures will be formed from all these things. So the mandibular process will give rise to the lower lip, this lower lip, and the lower side of the face. In this way. The lower lip and the lower side of the face. Then you have the maxillary process. The maxillary process will give rise to the lateral side of the lips, these two lateral side of the lip, and the cheeks, this cheek region, and the lateral side of the upper lip, the lateral side of the upper lip. In this way it will be forming over here. In this way. Okay. Now we will be having the two nasal processes, the lateral nasal process and the medial nasal process. So the middle part of the nose and the philtrum part and the middle part of the upper lip. The middle part of the nose, the philtrum part and the middle part of the upper lip. Middle part of the nose, the philtrum part and the middle part of the upper lip. It will be formed from the medial nasal process and the ala of the nose, and the lateral part of the nose. The ala of the nose and the lateral part of the nose will be formed from the lateral nasal process. I hope this is very clear to you guys. And the white thing that you can see over here, this entire white structure, it is formed from the frontonasal process. Okay. I hope I have drawn in very colorful manner. So let's revise everything once again. Come on. So for the first, the development of the face. For the development of the face, we required 5 components: frontonasal process, 2 mandibular process, 2 maxillary process. Both the mandibular process will come together and then it will form a big mandibular process. Here we have the frontonasal process. Inside the frontonasal process, we have the nasal placodes. From the mandibular process, it will give rise to 2 maxillary process. The maxillary process from the mandibular process, this was the mandibular process. So from the mandibular process, we had the development of the maxillary process, and from the maxillary process will now grows towards the upper side, and then the nasal placodes, it develops even more further, and now it will form nasal pits. The borders of these nasal pits becomes prominent, and now on the lateral side it is called as the lateral nasal process. On the medial side it is called as the medial nasal process. Now the maxillary process will start growing upward. It will touch the lateral nasal process and ultimately it will fuse with the medial nasal process on this side also. And now different structures will be formed from these structures that I have shown over here. From the mandibular process, the lower lip and the lower side of the face, that is the chin region. Then the maxillary process will be forming the lateral side of the upper lip and the upper side of the cheek region. This cheek region will be formed from the maxillary process. Then you have this philtrum, the medial side of the lips and the middle part of the nose. It will be formed from the medial nasal process. See, this is the philtrum, this line that you can see over here, this is the philtrum, and this is the medial part of the upper lip, and then the middle part of the nose. It will be formed from the medial nasal process, and then this is the ala of the nose. So the ala of the nose will be formed from the lateral nasal process. I hope this is very clear to you guys. This was all about the development of the face. In the next lecture, we will be learning about the developmental defects and the clinical anatomy of the development of the face. So I hope you like my video. I hope you understood everything regarding the development of the face. So let's meet in the next lecture, in which I will be teaching you about the developmental defects. Thank you so much guys. Please like my video, share my video, and also subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much guys.